We are on section number 171. Barabbas is released. Barabbas is released. And so we come to the question 953. What pressure did the Jews put on Pilate? Got that AC over there. Yeah. It keeps me from straining my neck. Okay. So what pressure did the Jews put on Pilate? We want to look at Mark. The AC is over here, Doug. If you want to use this seat. Okay. Mark 15, 6-9. Now at that feast he released unto them one prisoner, whomsoever they desired. And there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with them that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the multitude, crying aloud, began to desire him to do as he had ever done unto them. But Pilate answered them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? And so the answer is, what pressure did the Jews put on Pilate?
They wanted Barabbas released.
Yeah. They wanted him to honor their request for the different prisoner to be released and put Jesus in his place. The request of the Jews was really not just done by impulse. Okay, this was not something they just dreamed up on the spot. It was a custom that they'd been used to, so it was easy for them to try to now push from this angle. Pilate had previously suggested the idea as a way to escape his situation. It's possible the Jews had this as a backup plan all along, since it had been such a custom, or at the very least, they were quick to take advantage of the custom. And that reminds us how people are. People will often try to find some loophole to take advantage of rather than deal honestly with a situation. Always looking for a loophole, a little exception to the rule. Okay, John referred to Barabbas in question 954. John referred to Barabbas as a violent robber. What else was Barabbas known for? And I'm reading in Mark 15, 7-10. And there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with them that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy. And so what else was Barabbas known for besides being a violent robber? Murder and insurrectionist, a true insurrectionist. Now, back in section 169, John records in John 18:40 that Barabbas was a robber. The stark contrast between Jesus, who continually avoided being king and was only known to raise the dead, and Barabbas, who was known for his sedition, as confirmed by murdering someone in his insurrection, made the Jews' envy stand out in clear contrast. I mean, there's such non-comparison between the two. So this just, again, goes to speak of the radical nature of violence and how far people will go. This reminds me very much of the common argument today that speech is violence. And how do they get to that? Well, if you are not supporting some ungodly and just some ungodly cause, one of the perverted causes, if you're not supporting it, then they say that you're not doing anything to help the situation. And so they want you to move from being silent to not only speaking out, but now they want you to endorse the perverted and ungodly behaviors that are out there. And so by doing that, they're saying, well, your silence is contributing to violence. Therefore, since your silence is contributing to violence, which is imagined, number one, it's not real violence that they're facing anyhow. Since your silence is contributing to their sense of violence, then they will then say that your speech is violence because it's contributing to it, and so they will feel free to violently oppose you. Then, so this is how they get away with speech is violence. Okay, and we have with us. It's good to have Brother George, and introduce your dad to us.
This is Pastor Dance.
Okay. He threatened me he was going to come today. No. We were at the barbecue on Monday, and so we got to have a good fellowship there. And they'll do their morning service down in Newark, and then they'll do the evening service. Are you going over to Brother Swakowski's later? So yeah. So now we were just talking about preaching this morning in the sermon, the importance of preaching, how we need preaching. And look, there we go. There are some guys who know this by heart, that they need preaching, and so they're here today for that. Brother Joe, let me get you to share your comment, and then would you get yet one more of those books?
I can.
Okay.
Especially because I absolutely know where they are.
Okay.
There were a few things I wanted to say. My phone is ever go. There we go. A few things I wanted to say. One is, now I'm not dogmatic about this, but I'm quite convinced that by this point the Sanhedrin who are opposed to Jesus, they know exactly who he is. I hearken back to when Jesus raised Lazarus, and they were all up in arms because they were like, wow, Lazarus is going to go around and be a testimony that, he's going to speak the truth. So they said they were plotting to kill him. Okay, and then they were plotting to kill Jesus too, who they knew had raised Lazarus. Now, I don't know about you, but there aren't too many people walking around the streets raising people from the dead and claiming to be the Messiah. So I really strongly believe at this point they really know exactly who they're dealing with, and yet in whatever state of, I don't know, madness or power hunger or maybe even demonic or whatever, I think they know exactly what they're doing, and I think they know exactly who they're doing it to, but nothing like that is stopping them. So I just really, just from, and I hadn't come to this conclusion until within the last few years or so, I guess, after a more careful and reasoned study, or maybe just connecting the dots a little bit more carefully. But I can't see how they don't know who he is, because, they were all upset about Jesus, cramping their style and, threatening their power base. And then they said, well, we got to kill Lazarus too, because Lazarus is kind of a testimony as to who this Jesus is. And at that point, I got to say to myself, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah. In fact, I'm making a note. What is so prevalent by now is the abundance of clues that they had. Now, when you have that many clues, you are really without excuse.
Yes.
And I think that's the point you're trying to make, is that they really had to have gotten it because they had so much.
I really do think so. Maybe early in his ministry, they still had time to see things through and say, okay, we got to check this guy out and see what he's about. But I think when you start raising people from the dead, you got to think twice about what you're doing, and to be that vehemently opposed to someone who's done that. So. I wanted to say that.
I have fresh batteries in that purple microphone.
More time than that.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to say was, with all this cancel culture going on, we've come a long way from just leave us alone and let us live the way we want to live. That whole old adage, you give an inch and they ask for a yard. So that whole adage comes true. And, we've come a long way from, hey, what two people decide to do with themselves behind closed doors is their business. Well, I'd be satisfied with that, because they're trying to make it everybody's business now. They're the ones that have gone completely reverse and saying, you have to know what we're doing and you have to approve of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And not only do you have to approve, but you have to tell us that you approve of it. And
then you have to support us and help us do it. Yeah. And one of the things that this argumentation goes to, is that, sometimes, as literary critics or doing literary analysis and trying to do the hermeneutics and break things down and to be able to parse things out, to say, well, this is how we know they knew because they said this and that. This is a case of where you have a lot of circumstantial stuff, where you say the circumstances, the abundance of clues that they had, or the contrast that they had, I think it is safe for us to assume that they really did have knowledge of him as the Christ at this point. Certainly before this point even. Yeah. Also, my other notes here, there's always been the mentality of a cancel culture. There's always been cancel culture forever on the face of the earth. Okay, that will tolerate the worst offenses of one's own party while being willing to destroy their opposition. While people may argue the merits of their position, even if it's wrong-headed, what is truly objectionable is the hypocrisy. I don't mind people having things that they don't really have figured out all the way, and if they come to a wrong conclusion, I can understand that happens. It's never happened to me, right? Okay, but yeah, sure, it happens to all of us. But when the wrong ideas can be discarded, but people's hypocrisy demonstrates that they don't even believe their ideas have merit. It's like politicians and teachers' unions who try to eliminate school choice while they send their children to private schools. Okay, now there's nothing arguable about that. This is a clear case of hypocrisy. Or people who want to press for men to enter women's sports and private spaces while at the same time calling for women's rights. Okay, well, figure it out. If there's no such thing as women, then how can you call for rights for women's? I'm all for women's rights. I'm all for human rights. Here, the Jews would rather accept a manifest insurrectionist rather than someone who can truly revolutionize their life from within. Okay, Joe, if you could get that book for them, that would be great. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Something. Yeah, actually, recently in one of my classes, we were talking about the biological differences between men and women, and one of the students made a very strong point. He just said, well, why are there women's sports then?
Yeah.
There wouldn't be.
Right.
And actually, if you take all of this unsound reasoning to its logical conclusion, then there should be no gender in sports at all, and
Right.
then it's just the best athletes in the world do that,
Yeah.
and guess what? And you know what the result of that is going to be? Well, one, there won't be any more transgender athletes competing because they're only competing in the women's sports because they couldn't compete well in the men's.
Yeah.
And that really would be the only solution where no one could say, well, we're just taking the best athletes. You can't blame us. Now you're right. There's no gender, so there should be no men's sports and women's sports. There should just be sports.
Yeah, and in fact, you would be exactly logical to suggest that you should do away with the handicap Olympics. Because the whole idea behind women's sports, handicap Olympics, is handicapping. You're saying, hey, look, let people compete within their range. You have to draw the line somewhere. So again, the hypocrisies can abound. Okay, we're working through this as a study guide, and he's getting a book so you can follow along. I am going to be on page 294 when he brings that down. Okay, so question 955. Why might Pilate have expected the Jews to give in to the release of Jesus? Why would Pilate have, was there any reason that he should expect that? And this is Mark 15:10. It says, for he knew that the chief priest had delivered him for envy. So the answer is C. He probably thought that they would prefer Jesus, of whom they were only jealous, to Barabbas, who was a murderer among them. So yeah, he was wrong, Pilate was wrong, but he was probably hoping that if it was only a matter of jealousy, well, at least they might be able to come to their senses. So when you look at A, he thought they would rather have Jesus as their king rather than a murderer. Yeah, well, A would be the normal expectation. A would be the normal expectation. This points out how people will use reasoning only as an excuse for what they really want to do. Okay, when superior reasoning is used, they're quick to reject it, demonstrating that reason often has very little to do with our decision making. Okay, you would think reason would prevail. Okay, but no, the reasonable thing they didn't do. Okay, B, he thought they would be getting tired of their prosecution of Jesus. Well, the scripture does not say that Pilate hoped they would tire of their efforts, but this certainly does look like it's a possibility because of the number of times he tried to redirect them. Okay, he was faithfully trying to redirect. They just would not do it. Maybe he thought he was going to wear them down sooner or later. So C, the scripture, C, he would have only put the proposition to them in such stark terms for them to consider if it was a realistic possibility. I mean, he wouldn't do something if it wasn't a realistic possibility. However, you have to wonder how much he thought they would take him up on his offer. He probably had a clue. So a lot of times, we offer things to people knowing full well they're going to reject them, but they at least have to have their opportunity to have a stab at it. Even though we know that people can be totally unreasonable and act against their own best interests, we still have to be willing to offer them the gospel. Okay, 956. Why else was Pilate reluctant to prosecute Jesus further? And this is always a great one to preach about. It's going to be based on Matthew 27:19. This is when he was set down on the judgment seat. His wife sent unto him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. So the answer is, his wife advised him because of her convictions about Jesus. That should have done it, right? That's the only reason he actually needed, in all reality. Looking at B, he was not impressed with him and thought it was much ado about nothing. Now, well, there's no way that Jesus can be considered without having an effect on somebody. So there's no way that he would look at Jesus and say, this is nothing to me. That was never going to happen, not even in the best of circumstances. There might be many subjects that we can live without pursuing, such as art, literature, music, science, agriculture. We can live successful lives without one or more of those areas. However, when it comes to eternity, one is either faced with constantly in a state of being constantly in a state of limbo, waiting for an unavoidable meeting with God, or he's prepared to meet God because he's come into a meeting with God and in a saving relationship with Christ. A person can consider Christ and walk away, but that does not mean his concerns for eternity are taken care of. So Pilate's concerns are obvious in that he kept trying to find a way to handle the situation. There's no way to avoid Christ here. C, he wanted to show the Jews that he was the boss. Is that what Pilate was doing? Yeah, no. It was his wife's concerns. If Pilate was only committed to demonstrating his power was absolute, then he could have just dismissed the Jews at any time. Pilate demonstrated the very human characteristic of doubt. Now, I have to say that you do want to remember, as we've explained at other times, Pilate was in a kind of a tenuous situation with the Jews. He was always having issues with them. They did not want the government, the Romans, interfering with them. And so he was always on the brink of having to sort of appease them. But he was definitely not one. I mean, he could have used his power at any time and just said no and just tried to crush their insurrection. Okay, so the good answer here is A, his wife advised him because of her convictions about Jesus. Well, Pilate's wife served as a balancing influence to the hype that was overwhelming him. I think it's interesting, the statement that has ever been made, that women civilize men. Men would be happy to go out and have fist fights and go hunt things and do things like that, but living for a family and taking care of a family does have a way of civilizing men. Women's influence in the church should not be underestimated. I think some people, because she gets this in a dream, they might think, well, she got dreams. We're not really into dreams and things like that. And so, maybe she was being superstitious or something. And so maybe we want to discount it or discredit it. No, don't do that at all. Don't do that at all. One of the things about dreams, now on another discussion another time, when you talk about dreams, people will come to me and say, well, I had this dream. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to make them feel bad and to just be dismissive, but neither do I want people to think that they're going to get answers from God in dreams. More likely what happens in dreams is that things that we are burdened about will manifest themselves in dreams. And if God has put a burden on your heart, it could manifest itself in your dream also. So we're not going to say that dreams are inspired revelations from God, but neither do we want to dismiss dreams completely. Of course, if I told you some of my dreams, you'd say, well, I have no idea what that one means, right? And you probably have a few to share like that yourself besides. Too much pepperoni? Yeah. These days, if I'm eating pepperoni pizza, I'm in trouble anyhow. And then in fact, I'm going to let Nancy share because she might be thinking exactly what I'm thinking here. Let me give you a shot first.
Well, I think back in that day, since the Bible wasn't completed
Right.
yet, dreams were often, that people put more stock in them because that was one of the ways that God revealed things to people. So without the completion of the Bible, we don't have the same absolute warning that we do about extra revelation.
Okay. Yeah, we should point that out. Yeah, that's the case for dreams today. It could have been a revelation from God to her, okay, at that time, which goes to demonstrate the other point what I was about to make is that men and women think differently than each other and different things occur to us, just like that. It had not occurred to me to point that out. Women, by nature, are more intuitive than men are. Women, it's always a fun subject for me to get into, and I won't get into it completely here deeply. But one of the things that I especially got to point out in pre-marriage counseling, and it should really do gentlemen you good to know this anyhow about women, is that when the baby's being formed in the womb, that when there's the differentiation between male and female, the same hormonal wash that floods the body to change to determine the male gender, it also destroys part of the brain tissue connecting the two halves of the brain. It doesn't destroy it completely, it just alters that. And it also causes part of the male brain to become a little bit larger in size, a little bit thicker. And that is often where I point out the joke that no, men are not just thick-headed. Okay? But it's the spatial orientation. And so you'll see this, not 100%, okay, but by and large, you'll see that kind of difference. And what happens is because of these brain structures that are not destroyed in women, the two halves of their brains are communicating more thoroughly than men's brains are. And so men will be less in touch with their emotions. They have the emotions, they're just not as in touch with them as women are. And this brings out a whole thing about women's intuition, which would be which would be better described as rapid thinking is what it is. It's rapid thinking. And so to have her have this as an influence, it's good to point this out, that there was this added bonus that Pilate had to go on, his wife's influence, and it should speak to us as well today like that. Now, whether or not she had been explicitly influenced by God, she was certainly affected by the Christ encounter to the way the Jews had whipped themselves up into a fury. Okay, we have forces in our lives that we will wish we had paid more attention to. Okay. Miss Nora and then Brother Tone. Let me give you a microphone. Okay.
Maybe it's the same reason why men cannot multitask. Men are just like, like single task oriented, while women can do the wash and, can cook and do everything else and maybe embroider or something like that. So, so maybe that's the reason why.
Men are known for less multitasking than women. Stick me in front of a computer and try to talk to me. You'll find out exactly what that means. Okay, Brother Tone.
That's why men are better warriors, Pastor, because they're mission focused.
Yes.
They are not disturbed by any other
That's
distraction.
right. They are better warriors that way.
But regarding women having spiritual discernment, even among the disciples of Jesus, the apostles themselves did not believe that Jesus would die on the cross and resurrect on the third day. But the women were quick to understand this. In fact, Mary of Bethany had the spiritual sense to anoint Jesus for burial. Remember the incident about the expensive perfume she poured on the head and on the feet, and wiped them with her hair. The apostles were earthly in their understanding. They just agreed with Judas that was an expensive thing to be just splashing over Jesus, and yet she knew that Jesus, what Jesus was teaching them, that it will come to pass.
Yeah.
And it did. In fact, they were the first to be on the scene during the resurrection day, although their understanding. But Mary of Bethany was not there. The other Marys were there, and they thought that they will just improve the embalming of Jesus. But only and Jesus, who the first person to ever see Jesus was what's it called?
Mary Magdalene.
Mary Magdalene, yes.
Yeah. This is in a section that's coming up. This is one of the things that's going to be pointed out. You'll see who was there, who was there, who was there. Peter the Apostle, Peter the Apostle, Peter. No, it's never them. And it's a section on the women. It's the women who attended at the crucifixion, and they had evidently the more realistic insight amongst them. Okay, so that's going to be coming up. Okay, 957. Why did the people insist on Pilate releasing Barabbas? And this is going to be based on Mark 15, verses 11 to 14. But the chief priests moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. And Pilate answered and said again unto them, What will ye then that I shall do unto him whom ye call the King of the Jews? And they cried out again, Crucify him. Then Pilate said unto them, Why? What evil hath he done? And they cried out the more exceedingly, Crucify him. So why did the people insist on Pilate releasing Barabbas? The answer is, B, the chief priests and the elders had whipped them up into a mob. Okay, looking at A and B, and by the way, Brother Downs, the wrong answers here are just as significant because it gets us to go into other avenues on the topic there. So for A, they rethought all of his teachings and remembered how wicked he was. Wait a second. If they remembered his teaching, they wouldn't have known he was wicked. So they had to have ignored the teachings. Okay, or C, they were angry that Jesus had not healed enough of them. Okay, A points out how that people will not care about someone's teachings, especially since Barabbas had none. There were no teachings that Barabbas had. This question shows that there was more than the issue of the difference of character between Jesus and Barabbas. Jesus had a well-attested body of teaching. Barabbas had nothing. Jesus' ministry was public. Barabbas' work was secretive. Jesus had subjected himself to debate. Barabbas merely pressed his case with force. Jesus' ministry was intellectual. Barabbas' work was emotional and reactive. The mob's reaction in calling for Barabbas was totally reactionary and not a question of thoughtful judgment. And so we can see the effect of this same mob mentality today in people being willing to just jump onto a cause without careful examination of the cause. Okay, looking at C, they were angry that Jesus had not healed enough of them. Well, it's not as though Jesus had not done enough for the people. Okay, what he had done didn't even get any consideration at all. It's not whether he'd done enough. They weren't even thinking about that period. Ingratitude is an ugly thing that can turn people against you so easily. After all that Jesus had done to touch people's lives, they did not even consider what he had done for them. Okay, 958. What was Pilate's final verdict? And this is an important word here. And this is based on Luke 23, verses 24 and 25. And Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required, and he released unto them him for sedition and murder that was cast into prison, whom they had desired, but he delivered Jesus to their will, And then Matthew 27, verses 24 and 25, when Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, his blood is on us and on our children. So what was his final verdict? It was B, to wash his hands of the matter and turn it back onto the Jews' will. Now this is important. This is his verdict was not, his verdict was not to crucify Jesus. He did not pass sentence to crucify Jesus. He passed sentence to release Barabbas, and he turned it over to their will to do, for them to do it. Okay, his final verdict was not even to chastise him. He's going to chastise him, but that's not his final verdict. His final verdict is to declare him innocent. And say he washed his hands of it. He's an innocent man. Although Pilate would end up consenting to Jesus' death, it would be by the Jews' hand that this was done. So Pilate's actual verdict, again, was to wash his hands of the matter. The matter of scourging him, which is coming up next, is not part of a verdict. It was just some attempt to appease the Jews in some possible hope that they would cease their persecution of Jesus. And so in the next section, Pilate's going to actually repeat the verdict all over again in the next section. Brother Tone.
My answer here would be A, because of the single word sentence. Only a person sitting in judgment can pronounce a sentence. Therefore, whether whatever his feelings are or whatever the Jews are, he just rendered, he takes responsibility for the final sentence that he rendered, which is to crucify Christ. So,
Well, no, the sentence is to turn him over to his will and to release Barabbas. That's his actual sentence. If you look at verse number...
but
yeah.
that release,
Yeah.
in other words, he was letting people choose which between Jesus and Barabbas to free, and they chose Barabbas. Therefore, Jesus will still have to be sentenced, and Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. In other words, only one sitting in judgment is legally allowed to render the final verdict there, which is to crucify Christ.
Okay, it's still indirect. That's why I say they turn them over to their will. But the verdict, look up, somebody get me the etymology of the word verdict.
And
it says the speaking of truth is going to come to my mind. Hang on, let's just make sure of that. Okay, the finding or answer of a jury given to the court concerning a matter submitted to their judgment. So it's not the sentencing. The sentencing is different.
did that have a jury system?
No, he was, okay, it's kind of like when you have, when you as a, as a defendant, you can ask a judge to give you a non-jury trial where the judge becomes the one who is going to render the verdict. Mm-hmm. The rendering of the verdict is where it's like, okay, so jury, what do you say, guilty or not guilty? So that's the verdict. It's not really the sentencing. John, you want to weigh in on that real quick? Give him a microphone. Oh, go ahead.
So, theologically, though, Pilate cannot escape. He represents the Gentiles, and both the Gentiles and the Jews really crucified Jesus in spiritual terms. That's why I think Pilate carries more responsibility than the rest of them, because he was the ruler and who is the only one that can render capital punishment.
Okay. I'm going to read this from the dictionary. The verdict is the decision guilty or not guilty. In some courts, other verdicts are possible. The sentence is the punishment imposed as a result of a guilty verdict. I'm sorry? That would be, but the sentence is actually, he didn't even pass the sentence. The sentencing was to release him to the Jews for them to carry it out. Certainly by indirectly you could say that, but this is why I was careful to use the word verdict, because I wanted to point out that Pilate never did call him guilty. A conviction exists when the verdict is guilty, but not when the verdict is not guilty, it says here. So the sentence is different. So if anything, his verdict is that he's not guilty. His verdict is he's innocent. He says very specifically the word innocent. So that's the verdict part. Now, this by handing him over to the Jews to execute their sentence to crucify him, yeah, he's given them permission. But the thing I want to major on is the aspect that Pilate never actually does declare him guilty. Let me get to Brother Jonathan real quick, though.
Yeah, I think maybe the subtlety or the ambiguity that Brother Tone is pointing out is the question, like, can Pilate, even if he says he's washing his hands, can he really wash his hands? In other words, because it is the Roman soldier, I mean, you know, after this, right, it's the Roman soldiers that carry out the crucifixion. It's not, okay, he just released the Jews, okay, you go ahead and do what you want with them. That's not what ended up actually happening. And then in Luke, it says that he gave sentence that it should be as they required. So it seems as if you could
say...
As they
required, yeah.
You could say, okay, in his words, he's trying to wash his hands of the matter, but you could ask, is he really?
Yeah.
Are his actions doing something different than his words, or is he deluding himself into thinking, okay, I'm completely innocent of this, I'm washing my hands? I think that's the subtlety here. I think there's some ambiguity in there.
Yeah, the reason I'm sort of smiling here is because, you see, you guys are talking about reality. That's the reality of the situation. That is true. What I'm doing here essentially is looking at the specifics of the legalities that were going on, and the word verdict means to speak truly. So it's speaking the truth. So he is rendering a verdict. That because I wanted to key in on the aspect of him declaring him innocent, and which I suppose what we should point out here, the connection between both of these considerations is the hypocrisy between them. The hypocrisy where you're declaring somebody innocent, but you're enabling the Jews to carry it out. Do you really get to call yourself, and that's what you guys are saying is, do you really get to call yourself totally innocent in a situation like that, or totally wash your hands of it? So legally, perhaps yes. Realistically, we see them all as guilty. Before I call on Brother George over here, let me point out that one of the questions that this even goes to is that you'll hear the question about who killed Jesus Christ, because this became an issue. I don't know if it was part of the blood libel was something different. Anyhow, of accusing the Jews of being Christ killers, macha Christou, okay, killers of Christ. And we like to point out, Pilate had a hand in this, and when you think about it figuratively, we all had a hand in killing Christ. I think the significance of this is to ultimately is to not let this go in an anti-Semitic vein, and that's probably the side area that's probably the worst there. Brother George, if we can put a microphone on you so anybody at home might be able to hear what you have to say.
I was just saying that I think the thoughts being shared is very valid. I think the big question comes down to not that we don't have an accurate understanding of the situation, but perhaps the way the question is worded is adding a lot of
I'm trying to narrow things down. I'm trying to zero in on something there, yeah.
Right. if I wanted to look at the wording of the question per se, who would, in a court, who would be the one who would give the verdict? Would it be the jury? Would it be the judge?
Well, it would depend. If you were, and this is what I was pointing out earlier.
Yeah.
You can, as a defendant, you can ask for a trial, a non-jury trial, in which case the judge serves as the jury. Right. You're willing to say, Judge, I'm willing to leave it up to you completely. I want to forego the benefit of having jurors. I'll let you be my only juror. So that's why that, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Somebody else over here. Brother Joe and then Brother Doug.
I just wanted to say that, in some sense, Barabbas is the first person that Jesus died for in his place, because Barabbas was slated to be executed for his crimes, and you can imagine when the Roman soldiers came to tell Barabbas that he was going to be freed, that he was expecting that they were going to be taking him to his execution, and then they just finally said, hey, here you are, you're free to go. And you could imagine that he looked and said, wow, Jesus is going to die in my place. I just hope he got the major implications of that.
Well, I think there's been movies made about that.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to Barabbas?
Yeah.
Some good speculation there. Brother Doug, yes.
I lost it. I got it.
Oh.
Okay. Like you said, Pastor, before, I forgot what that was. But it's distorting the fact. That's what they were bringing up as in reality. You're distorting the fact if you're guilty or not guilty. You're trying to twist words.
Yeah.
That's how it would play out. But if you're guilty, there's nothing in the world going to change it, except
Yeah.
God can change it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, anything else? That is the last question. Brother Tone, yes.
Here you go.
Yeah, this question number 954, Pastor.
Yes.
Was it in the book of John or in Luke 23:19 and Mark 15:7?
Okay, I only quoted Mark 15, 7 and 10, and then it's found in John 18:40 are the references. Let me see. Luke might have repeated it. Let's see if he did that. Okay.
23:19.
Hang on, I think I just lost my section. 954, 15, 7, 10, 15.
Who for a certain sedition made in the city and for murder was cast into prison, referring to Barabbas.
Yes. Yeah, you can also add on to that Luke 23, 19.